Welcome back to part 2 of the Pause Break 32X Retrospective, where we'll be taking a look at a few more games for Sega's ill-fated mid-90s add-on. If you haven't already done so, then it might be a wise choice to check out the previous part 1 to this series, where we take a look at the history of the console and a few different games, like Virtua Racing, Doom, Tempo, and Colibri. Otherwise, if you're ready to take a look at some more games and come to our verdict on whether or not this system is worth a second look, let's take a look at our first title of the video. This is Sega's own Star Wars Arcade, a launch title and adaptation of a Japan-only arcade game for the Sega Model 1 hardware. The 32X had a surprising number of 3D space shooters, and you can't talk about that without mentioning this one. If you're into your Star Wars, you might be impressed with just how closely this game's representation mirrors A New Hope. Right down to the opening shot of the blockade runner fleeing from the Star Destroyer. Even the yellow intro crawler's here, though it quickly becomes illegible pixels as it fades into the distance. Voice samples from Admiral Akbar, Darth Vader, and John Williams' score are played liberally too, and it really goes a long way with the license and likeness to the original film and its iconic space battles. You'll spend your time playing this game engaging in dogfights with multiple waves of TIE fighters before finally making an assault run on the Death Star, just like the movie. Control is okay, if a little restricted, while the trench run works just fine. Taking down the arbitrary number of TIEs beforehand is tedious and repetitive. While you're able to switch between first-person and third-person views, this does little to mitigate the fact that these things move way too fast and you move way too slow. Oftentimes enemies will be little more than blurs moving across your screen that you have no hope of catching up to, and your speed control does little to help you evade enemy fire. The game does run well, possibly due to the choice to flat shade its polygons instead of using textures, but in general this arcade port is fairly shallow. You can have your fun with it over the course of maybe 2 hours, and then you won't have much reason to replay. Trust me, you can find better on the 32X. Like Shadow Squadron, released about half a year later in June 95 by Sega themselves as well. Although this one lacks the Star Wars license, the influences are easy to see and it's something of a spiritual successor. Pilot a fighter ship through space, take down certain numbers of enemy ships per stage, speed up and slow down, but you can make much tighter turns and have far more freedom to take on enemies as you see fit this time around. There's a bit of a learning curve to using the built-in radar, but once you're used to it, it shouldn't be too hard to figure out where you're going, especially when you have the massive Dreadnought ships to take down as landmarks. Even in single player, you have a choice of 2 ships this time, plus the option to let the game autopilot while you just focus on shooting for either of them. And the cutscenes might just be even cooler than Star Wars, with this liftoff sequence being a personal highlight for me. The game runs nice and smooth with no hiccups to be found as well. The explosions are large and accompanied with satisfying noises, and honestly, I find the more traditional video game music far more enjoyable than scratchy, farty renditions of John Williams' music. All in all, this is a fantastic follow-up and a real great game for this system, the perfect blend of its graphical capabilities with some nice game design as well. While it might not be the most intense game ever, it's a lot of fun, and a must-play if you happen to own a 32X. DarXide is a PAL exclusive released by Frontier Developments and was the final game released for the 32X in Europe, landing in January 1996. As you can see, DarXide is easily the most graphically ambitious game of our lineup and looks amazing by 32X standards. 3D polygonal graphics are on display constantly and all the 3D models are fully textured and even independently lit. In screenshots, this honestly looks like a PS1 or Saturn game, but playing it's a whole different story. This title struggles to put out 20 FPS when there's nothing on screen, and during more heated action scenes this dips to a point where the 32X struggles to maintain double digits. Though the action only gets heated in relative terms, I'll just come out with it and say that this is asteroids with another dimension tacked on. You fly around finding big old rocks, blast them until they explode into smaller rocks, and repeat the process until there are no rocks left. Over and over again. And that's fine, I actually quite like asteroids, but in that game the challenge is balanced. You can see everything around you, you know where everything is, and you have as long as you need to get the job done. DarXide's 3D 6-axis field of play and third-person camera combine with the terrible draw distance to deprive you of such luxuries, and Frontier decided to suck even more joy out of the experience by slapping an incredibly strict time limit on every mission. So essentially, you're screwed if you can't figure out how the arbitrary bullshit radar up at the top of the screen Greenworks. In short, I can't really tell what DarXide is trying to be. It seems almost like a tech demo, but the system was already on its deathbed. It takes the basic concept of asteroids and squanders everything that made it fun in order to make way for a frustrating, dull, and all-around underwhelming experience. Unfortunately, there isn't much for fighting game fans on the 32X, and trust me when I say that December 1994's Cosmic Carnage isn't worth it even if you're desperate. The inmates have escaped on the prison ship, and now, as if things couldn't get any worse, the whole thing has to be abandoned and there's only one escape pod. What are the 4 surviving inmates and 4 surviving soldiers to do? Well, simple, hold a one-on-one fighting tournament. That's how everything was solved in the 90s. Getting into the game, the visuals are a little more colourful than a standard Megadrive game, but a grey platform floating in space is a grey platform floating in space, and that's what most of these stages are. None of the characters are particularly appealing to look at either or make me want to play as them, and trust me, they don't get more appealing when the game decides to zoom in for a throw or fatality and tank the already disappointing frame rate. 4 of the 8 characters have a mechanic where you can kit them out in lighter or heavier armour, but either way it's going to feel as if you're wearing concrete shoes. Controlling this game is incredibly unresponsive and jerky, and oftentimes you'll end up struggling to get your character anywhere without getting the snot kicked out of you by your opponent. Not to mention, certain special moves are locked behind certain pieces of armor. Sure, I have the internet these days and can go on GameFAQs to figure out what the moves are, but how was any poor sap back in the day meant to figure out what does what and how they can strategize effectively when moves come and go arbitrarily like that? Cosmic Carnage is just an absolute mess, and both fighting game fans and regular gamers would be disappointed if they picked this up. But on the other hand, if you simply have to pick up a fighting game for the system, you'd be best off with Sega's very own Virtua Fighter. Although this was one of the most anticipated 32X games prior to release, the unfortunate owners of the system would have to wait until October 1995 to get a taste of it for themselves, and had to simply watch as Saturn owners tore it to shreds. The Virtua Fighter series has never been the favourite in the West, and as far as we're concerned over here, its primary achievement was just that it was the very first fully polygonal 3D fighting game. And good god, does it feel like it. I know this was incredibly advanced for its time, but combat is slow and floaty, and the AI very quickly ramps up to quarter-munching bastardry by the time you get to Pi. I do appreciate the simple controls though. With only a block, punch and kick button, special moves become less about inputting some bizarre button combination correctly and get as simple as punch punch kick or something like that. Putting that aside, graphics are understandably a step down from both the Saturn and arcade versions. The most obvious changes are in model definition, where all the characters have less detail and polygons, but backgrounds appear more dithered and look to be lower resolution too. The frame rate, however, is surprisingly solid, not the most fluid experience in the world by any stretch, but the 32X is clearly working overtime here and it pays off. Unfortunately, the poor thing just can't compete in the sound department. Sound effects aren't terrible, though a little muffled, but the arcade version music just can't be represented properly by the wimpy Yamaha sound chip in the Megadrive. Still though, this is a pretty good effort, and it's surprising to see just how close it got to matching next-gen hardware, though I'm not sure if that's a point for the 32X or a point against the Saturn version, seeing as Virtua Fighter Remix wipes the floor with both of them. Still, definitely one of the more iconic releases for the system though. Next up is Blizzard and Interplay's Blackthorne from October 95. Looking at the cover, you'd expect this to be a run and gun, but nope. This is a slow, cinematic platformer in the vein of Prince of Persia, Another World, and particularly Flashback. If you go trying to run and jump everywhere willy-nilly, you'll end up dead very quickly, so taking things slow and planning your moves is the name of the game here. On the planet Tool, the evil Kadra have enslaved the Androthi race to create a world of darkness. You play as the messianic Kyle Blackthorne, a human mercenary and Androthi's last hope to defeat the evil Lord Sarlach, armed only with a shotgun and the occasional bomb. Combat has a few neat tricks up its sleeve to make firefights complex and tense. You have to manually draw the aforementioned gun with the A button first of all, and it's not like you can just keep it drawn constantly in case of any ambushes as it prevents you from running or jumping whilst it's out. Then you have to utilize cover to avoid enemy shots by pressing up to lean against walls. It really makes every battle feel perilous in a way that others in the genre can't quite match up to, and if you end up hesitating too much, eventually your foes will close in on your position. While the game's also available on the Super Nintendo and DOS, the 32X version brings smoothly animated pre-rendered 3D sprites to all the characters and provides some much needed depth to the backgrounds. Honestly, with the whole slavery thing going on, it kinda reminds me of Oddworld. The sound effects are a little weak though, and the music is very droning and repetitive. All in all though, Blackthorne is certainly one of the better looking 2D games for Sega's add-on, and you should check it out on either system. While European regions got DarXide for their final 32X game, North America wasn't quite so lucky in that regard. Instead, their final release and our final game of today is The Amazing Spider-Man Web of Fire, released in January 1996. Blue Sky Software, the guys behind Vector Man, handled this one, and though it might be something of a holy grail for collectors, the value for money here is absolutely abysmal, and I question how Blue Sky just sort of forgot how to make video games. Long before Hydra were a household name thanks to the MCU movies, their diabolical scheme for this game was to trap New York City in a giant laser web and hold it ransom for $1 billion. Worse yet, Daredevil's been captured by them, and that leaves Spider-Man as the only New Yorker capable of stopping their ne'er-do-wellery. Oh, and don't expect any of Hydra's budget to have gone to A-list Spider-Man villains like Doc Ock, the Green Goblin, or Venom. All you're getting here are the likes of Dragon Man, the Eel, and Thermite. Don't know who they are? Join the club. Aesthetically, this barely looks better than an early Megadrive game, despite the absurd numbers of frames in Spidey's running cycle as he skedaddles around the screen like a bloody idiot. Colours are bland and grody, pre-rendered characters look like they've been cut out of a JPEG, and animations are choppy whenever you're doing anything other than running. How is it that a 32-bit game like this, the culmination of the 32X's lifespan, resulted in something that barely looks 16-bit at times? The music too sounds like something coming from the regular, bog-standard Megadrive, so I really don't understand why this was a 32X exclusive. But I'd be able to forgive all that, every little bit, if it weren't for the gameplay. Where do I even begin with this monstrosity? Parker's abilities are thoroughly insipid. Though he runs at lightning speeds, his jump is fairly weak unless augmented with web swinging done via pressing the jump button in midair. But even weaker than that are his combat abilities. Get this, he only has a single combo, a running kick, and the ability to shoot web that stuns enemies for about a second before they break free anyway. And that combo is more effort than it's worth because Spidey has horrible reach, and his punches do almost no damage on any of the bigger enemies. But don't worry, at least it's got the strength to knock them back far enough that you can't hit them anymore. Perhaps in these situations, it would be wise to call in Daredevil as a screen nuke, which can be done via the pause menu. Web crawling makes an appearance, but oh man is it bad. You stick to any wall or ceiling you jump towards, but in some of the more cramped areas that just means you end up sticking to everything like it's a hot summer's day, and enemies are more than happy to keep attacking while you try and wrench yourself free. Level design is either simplistic to a fault, over-cramped, or just filled with so many repetitive, tedious, and downright annoying enemies that it's an absolute joke. In fact, this whole game is an absolute joke. It almost feels like it belongs on one of those shoddy bootlegs, not from a system that was supposed to be able to give the PS1 a run for its money. This game is honestly everything that's wrong with game collecting. So in the end, was the 32X good all along? Was this mushroom-shaped, cartridge slot-occupying piece of hardware a misunderstood masterpiece? Were consumers perhaps too quick to judge, too eager to gloss over it? No, absolutely not. Don't get me wrong, if you take the time to look in the system's library, you'll find some diamonds in the rough. Virtua Racing and Colibri hold experiences unseen anywhere else, Tempo and Shadow Squadron are worth a look too, and Doom has far worse ports out there. Plus, even though I didn't really get the chance to discuss them, the 32X ports of NBA Jam and Mortal Kombat 2 are the best home versions out there. But the rough is very, very rough. Out of the 40 games on the system, there's more bad than good, and I can only imagine how crushing it would be to put faith in Sega only for the well of games to run dry 3 months in. Honestly, my opinion is that the 32X should never have got to store shelves and was essentially crippled from the moment it became clear the Saturn would make it to market on time. Although I will say that hindsight is 2020, it's very easy for all of us to say this 2.5 decades later that Sega blindly pissed away all their goodwill with a series of bad decisions that led to them dropping out of the console business altogether, and it all started with them completely misjudging how big a splash the Atari Jaguar would make. But spare a thought for those who adopted the Google Stadia and are beginning that very same process of betrayal. Hold on, we're not done yet. What, you really thought I was gonna do a 32X retrospective and not talk about the big granddaddy of its library? The killer app? The one reason anyone remembers this infernal chode-looking thing even exists? That's right, everyone. Join me next time when we'll take a look at Knuckles' Chaotix. See you all soon.